Hello and welcome to the On Target podcast. Today I'm talking with a man with a pedigreed career, having worked for multiple heavy-hitting companies such as Scale AI, Twilio, Cisco, and Oracle. Currently a partner at New View Capital, Chetan Chaudhary has helped to establish sales teams, drive revenue across international markets, and establish go-to-market strategies for numerous companies all over the world. Really excited to hear more about his pragmatic approach to leadership and how his executive experience helps global organizations to attain peak levels of performance. Not to mention that we also used to work together, so this should be fun. Chetan, it's great to have you on.
Thank you, Alex, for having me on.
Absolutely. Now, you'll know salespeople need an elevator pitch, and you pitch your company day in, day out, or you certainly pitch to other companies or hear pitches from some of the potential portfolio companies. So if you had to give an elevator pitch for yourself in 30 seconds or less, how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I would introduce myself as a technologist that turned sales professional, that has turned distribution leader. And I think that's pretty much been the story of my career the entire time. Someone that believes in sweating the details and building those routes to market to make an efficient sales process. And so I am both a qualitative and quantitative leader as I see it.
Simple but effective, eh? Let's unpack your story a bit more, Chetan. I'd love to learn more about your story, both personal and professional. Be great to just highlight some of your biggest lessons, biggest learnings and highlights.
Yeah, if I start in the beginning, actually my degree is in computer science, and I first started out my career at Cisco in the late 90s writing network utilization tools. I bring that up not because it's terribly relevant to the rest of my career, but I think it gave me a foundation that's rooted in technology and understanding complex subjects. And so subsequently from there, I think my superpower over the last several years has been intertwining sort of my technical selling ability into the sales processes. And so you see that at Oracle when I go in the early days and I'm an inside sales rep, I'm really successful because I understand the concepts of a database. I understand the concepts of the application server. You see that again when I get to Cisco and I'm able to understand the channel market, the sales motion, but also under the underlying technologies, the routing and switching that I was selling. And then that propels me right into Twilio, where because of my computer science background, I was able to play with the API at very early stages of Twilio, post-Series B. They were only 50 or 60 employees at the time, and getting a phone to ring was magical. And I was able to play around and say, like, this is amazing. And really that kind of led me into everything else subsequently that I've done from there. I've kind of just rooted it in technology and understanding complex subjects and being able to articulate that value throughout my sales career.
It sounds like you've always sweated the details. You spent a lot of time, from what I heard there, really trying to become a master of the tool, the product, the service solution that you're offering or representing. And when I reflect over my own career, I could definitely attest to the fact that that's always been a staple part of my success. When you think of building and scaling sustainable sales teams, how important do you feel that enablement around the technology and the product is to actually build a team that can be effective out there in the field?
I think it's a really great question. And if you think about the deals that you've done over the course of your career, the deals that you probably feel the most proud about is when that you had this connection with this customer and you were able to get them to see the vision of the product that you were selling. And oftentimes, I think that is really occurs when you understand the value proposition of the product that you're selling. And if you unpack what does that really mean, it is sweating the details like you described. It's actually going through and understanding why a developer API is going to be applicable to that developer building the next generation tool. Or, if it's selling a database or selling switching and routing, it's really understanding the use cases. It's understanding the details, what drives the business outcome that, these people are now going to buy your service or your product. What is really going to happen to them by doing that? And when you're able to tie those things together, you make probably the strongest arguments, and you're able to make it resonate with the customer in a way that the other competitors are not able to do. And so I think it is sweating the details, and I think, understanding that value prop is probably one of the most important details that you can really learn when selling.
For sure. So, I mean, if we zoom this out and have our sales leadership hats on here, one of the key things is then how do you really drive that type of mentality at scale, right? If you've got a team of 20, 50, 100 sellers, and you really want to get everyone comfortable around the importance of almost being a technical seller and not solely focusing on the commercial mindset. Have you had any playbooks or tactics or approaches that you've seen that have been successful at really conditioning the team to be focused around that technical part of the job?
I think there are three things that you have to do. The first is cultural, and I think that's the most important piece. And so instilling the culture within the team of being a solution seller, being someone that can actually articulate value and be very consultative in their sale is a pretty critical component that you need to instill within the team. Now, that can take forms of, making sure people are going through and certifying their pitches. It could be, writing and building value prop docs to be able to go out and make sure they can articulate that value correctly. But it's a very important aspect that you have to get right culturally. I think the second piece that people need to do tactically is they really need to spend a little bit more time on enablement. So the sales enablement component of your sales team, when you're doing this at scale, you need to make sure that everybody's singing from the same playbook or the same songbook. And you need to be able to make sure that the enablement is at a level of detail that is commensurate to where you want the team to be. So it cannot be surface level, just give me your pitch. Like, it's got to go deeper into use case and value prop and business outcome and really what the mentality of the ICP is. And when you get to that level of detail in the enablement, usually this starts to percolate up into the way that you sell. And then I think lastly, it's really just the operational discipline around, how you actually drive a team. So when you're driving a team, oftentimes when you get people to stand and deliver like they would do in a sales meeting, you get to probe and ask more questions that really forces them to think about the value prop, really think about the details of the customer, really think about the outcomes they're trying to drive, and not be very surface level. And people sometimes would shy away, but of kind of really pressure testing it inside these teams. But oftentimes the best sales teams, when they have that leader that really is pressure testing it, it starts to translate into a very sort of technical, solution-oriented, consultative sales team versus the teams that are very transactional.
I love those three. And on that point of pressure testing, something that, I'd been experimenting with my team that's had great success is just off the back of sales enablement is actually doing role plays for things such as demos, right? And trying to certify the proficiency of your team actually being able to carry both a technical message, but also relaying some of the core tenets of things that a rep has understood through their discovery, and making sure that they continue to tie back the technical added value of the service or solution also into the business benefits that they might have unpacked during a discovery meeting. So again, a lot of this comes back to that sweating the detail, but also taking enablement programs to the next level to make sure, to your point, that we're pressure testing these things as well. We've spoken a bit about enablement and talent, Chetan, and I'd love to start to unpack your perspective around what makes great salespeople, what makes great sales leaders. We'll start with the salespeople themselves, first of all. Just talk to us about some of the characteristics that stand out to you when you think of great salespeople.
I think we talked a little bit about it here already. Great salespeople do sweat the details. They're very disciplined. What I have found, oftentimes it's the sales leader or the salesperson that has a bit of a chip on their shoulder. They have something to prove. They really want to strive for excellence. They want to get to the next level. If you can sense that in an individual, plus you can also see that they're willing to take feedback, take direction, and they're willing to kind of follow the process that you have set forth, usually those are the salespeople that you see at club. Usually those are the salespeople that you're seeing up at the end of the year and getting the sales award. And so those individuals, I think it's the grit, it's the chip on your shoulder, wanting to go out and prove something and really go out after something, with the combination of the details, the operational details that you described earlier. It's that intersection that I oftentimes find really great salespeople. It's not that they have a technical background and that they really understand the developer very well. It's really those first two things that can train someone to be a phenomenal seller, because those are the individuals that will really connect with their customers in a way that most people do not, and they'll treat them much more of a longer relationship than a transaction.
And how can sales leaders test for some of this stuff, right? I think about this point on attention to detail and some of the intrinsic things that you've just touched on there. How can a sales leader start to test for that and unpack that during an interview process to make sure that actually they're looking at a candidate that fulfills that type of criteria?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. The salespeople and sales leaders, I've recently have been working with our portfolio companies on how to hire a CRO, and I think this is applicable to hiring a CRO as well. The way that you want to test is really in a couple of dimensions. So there is very, very common to have, hey, show me your 30, 60, 90-day plan. Come up with a 30, 60, 90-day plan and present it to me. And they will oftentimes come in and present that plan to you. And you're like, oh, okay, the guy's going to build pipeline. He's going to do, he's going to make 150 phone calls, 150 emails. He kind of has broken it down. And that's a very common thing for sales interview process to happen. I think the next thing is that you oftentimes see is, hey, present something to us. Present your pitch, your company is very common in a sales interview process. I like to take that presentation a little bit further to test this detail orientation, which is I like to ask them to teach me something in a presentation, but teach me something that's technical. That doesn't matter whether it's baking cookies or whether it's fixing a carburetor or whether it's showing me technically how to be a better golfer, whatever it is. Show me something that's technical and break it down for me and teach me how to do that. Because when you're trying to teach someone, you're sweating the details. Every little thing matters. If you're baking cookies, you're not going to forget to teach them that they need to put some sugar in that mix. If it's a golf swing, it's the fundamentals of a golf swing are very different. And so that presentation, I think, is very critical. And then the last and the most important thing that I have found in interviewing good salespeople is that I will give them a small written sample. I will tell them it's the last day of the quarter. You are trying to write an email to the CFO or the CEO to convince them that they should, buy your product. Here's the discount. Here's the dollar amounts. Here are the people that you're talking through. I'll give them a little scenario, a written prompt, and I'll tell them, write me an email. That email could be 3 paragraphs, 3 lines, or 3 pages. Doesn't matter. But you write me a paragraph that is demonstrating to me in written form why I should buy your product given this writing prompt. And I have found that has been the greatest predictor of whether a good salesperson or not. Because if you're able to articulate value and a business outcome in written prose form, that shows a level of organization and detail that most salespeople are not doing. And it's those sellers that I often want to bring along with me to the companies that I go and work with, because I'm like, that guy knows how to do it. He knows how at the last day of the quarter, how to write a persuasive email to the CEO. I know that person's going to do the work and they're going to use the right level of detail to drive that transaction.
These are really interesting tactical plays. You could probably tell from my reaction. I loved the teach me something. I've not actually heard someone come out with that before, but the thought behind that just makes so much sense, right? The attention to detail, the way that you've got to construct and actually articulate what it is that you're sharing when you're attempting to teach someone something, that's a fantastic one. And I think one that many sales leaders should absolutely take away from. I did mention that I'd love to also get your perspective around sales leadership. And of course, there's different tiers to that. You've spoken about CROs, and of course, you've got frontline managers and everything in between. But I'd love for you to unpack for us some of the core staple ingredients of high potential sales leaders. What are the first things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I like to break sales leaders into two buckets. There are sales leaders that are very good at pipeline inspection, hiring a team, running a forecast call, very traditional sort of sales individuals. And based on the maturity of your company, you need those individuals. So you oftentimes need someone to just set up the basic sales process, how to forecast, how to run and qualify opportunities, how to actually understand how to qualify a deal. These are the sales basics, and those are traditional sales leaders. Typically, companies that are just getting started, let's say sub 20, 30 million in sales, they need sales leaders. If you're 30 million and beyond and you're trying to get to 300 million, let's say, you're going to start to approach where you need more what I would call a distribution leader. And a distribution leader is someone that understands a route to market. They understand how to allocate capital within that route to market to drive an efficient sales process. So they're a very different sort of lens on how they think about go-to-market. They're looking at the total addressable market and they're saying, all right, well, the best way to attack our SMB strategy is through a channel partner. Our best way to attack a mid-market, all right, is to have a direct sellers. Okay, well, in the enterprise, it might be going through 2 or 3, large SIs, or maybe the enterprise market, we really need to do a named account model, and we really need to have a very different sales motion. These are distribution leaders that are thinking more broadly than just a sales leader. And so those are the two sort of archetypes per se. Now, both archetypes are extremely important, and depending on the maturity of the company, I think you can lean on one versus the other. But those are the type of leaders that I like to think about when I'm advising a portfolio company on either hire a distribution leader or a sales leader. I kind of make them think about it in those two buckets.
Really fascinating. As I listen to that, a lot of that really tells me about the way that they think, and in a way their operational rigor. What I'd still love to get from you is when you look at the DNA and the characteristics of that leader that's in front of you, are there particular traits that you're looking for? Are there particular, again, characteristics that you're looking out for when you're actually in front of that person? Is it, emotional intelligence? Is there empathy? Whatever it might be, I'd love to just hear who is that person at their core.
Yeah, I think those two that you just mentioned are definitely extremely important. Emotional intelligence, being an empathetic leader, these are things that are pretty critical. At the end of the day, I think it comes down and boils down to one characteristic that I like, and it's grit or passion. And you will find that the folks that have both the emotional intelligence and the empathy that you want, but minus the grit, still doesn't quite fit within the organization. But when all those things sort of line up, and they've got a level of humility with them, and they've got a level of just the way that they carry themselves as a leader, having a little bit of humbleness to it. I think these are the things that I always look for. If they're really arrogant and they've got a chip on their shoulder, they probably are not empathetic, and they're not really got emotional intelligence. So you kind of, you want to let those guys slide. And the folks that do line up with that humility and empathy, but still have a lot of grit and want to make something happen, that are leaning forward, or as one boss used to tell me, are you standing on the balls of your feet or on the heels of your feet? And if you can tell that they're on the balls of their feet, then yeah, those are the people that are leaning in, and we want to go after those individuals.
I see a level of synergy in certain aspects of the traits that you look out for in a seller and a leader. This premise of really having a strong why, something that's driving that person to want to go out there and achieve in some way. I noted your point around the chip on the shoulder and the potential contradiction with being empathetic. I would actually say that I feel like there's two types of chips on the shoulder, right? You can have one that I would describe as healthy in a way, which is where you've got something that you want to prove, whether it's to yourself or to the world, because that can actually be quite a powerful form of a motivation or some form of drive, depending on what that chip is and how it's helping you. And then there's unhealthy ones, right? Ones that, as you say, do conflict in some way with being empathetic or actually cannibalize that person's ability to go out there and be successful. So an interesting broader topic / debate to be had. There's a unique perspective which you're going to have, Chetan, based on your time working as an operator and now being in the VC world, in the way that you're able to inspect and analyze sellers, leaders, and go-to-market functions. I'd love to learn from you more about some of the core tenets or core ingredients that you feel should be staple to really any go-to-market plan. Are there specific again, tenets or principles that you feel any thriving GTM plan should absolutely include?
Well, I think there's probably, it's not necessarily a fundamental tenets. I think they are aspects or dimensions to a good go-to-market plan. And I think that there are probably 5, maybe 6 that I can think of right off the top of my head that I really think about when I'm coaching CROs or I'm coaching founders about how to think about their go-to-market. First, it's defining your sales motion. What is your sales motion? Is it a PLG motion plus enterprise? Is it just enterprise sales? Is it a channel sale? Like, you have to define that. The next is understanding your market. So how do you segment your market that you're going after? And once you do segment that market, enterprise, mid-market, and SMB, really understanding what the coverage model is against that market. And how are you going to cover that segment of the market that you're going after? Once you've done that, I think it's building a sales productivity model, understanding how fast do you have to hire, how long is it going to take to ramp, and how much, what's the model in which that you're seeing where people are going to attain quota. And then after you've got this kind of model, you've got this plan, you've got these dimensions, now we're trying to fine tune. Now we're saying, okay, can I use sales compensation as a lever? So defining a really good sales comp plan to drive the efficiency of the sales process. Building and making sure enablement is really strong, and understanding what that plays into your model. And so essentially your sales P&L is a better way to think about it. It's how do you allocate capital now within your own budget, within your own functions of your group of sales to drive these behaviors and actually make the model start producing. And lastly, it's probably just sitting down and really understanding the operational discipline that forces everyone to be at a certain heartbeat of the organization. So your operating cadences and rhythms. That's everything from your forecast meeting down to your QBR meeting schedule to your pipeline inspection meetings. Like, these are really important aspects of your sales model or your sales plan. People forget. They're like, oh yeah, of course we have a forecast meeting. Well, it's what you're doing in the forecast meeting. How are you collecting the data in the forecast meeting? How accurate are your sellers rolling up that forecast to their frontline managers to then getting to you? Because you're playing operator, right? And we all have played that game operator where you whisper in someone's ear and it goes around the table and what originally you said was changed. That happens in a forecast too. And so you want to make sure that these disciplined elements are actually really ingrained into the sales plan in order to get the right outcomes.
A lot of this still seems to come back to that sweating the detail, which is a big takeaway from me for this conversation. At every layer and in every piece component that you've spoken about, it's always about getting to that layer 2, layer 3 of understanding, really fleshing these things out and being thoughtful at every single step. As you think through everything that you just covered, those 6 points, are there any common mistakes, common areas where you tend to see that sales leaders tend to fall short on that they should keep an eye out for?
Well, I think there are the biggest area that I think that sales leaders fall short on is in their yearly planning process. There's a top-down number that comes back from the CEO or from corporate. We need to hit 200 million in sales. And then they try to do a bottoms-up forecast, and they do a bottoms-up, and they're like, we're at 120. And there's a gap of that 80 million. And, understanding how to articulate that gap, how to actually make sense of that gap. Is it true gap or not? Is the field being too conservative and the corporate, CFO, CEO being too aggressive? Where does that intersection happen? And really getting a sense, again, back to your point earlier, it's like getting into the details and really understanding how that process works for your yearly planning cycle. Because your yearly planning cycle is the one place that is going to help you govern the team for the year. Because as good salespeople, we know that if I give you $1 million quota, you're going to break that down into how many emails I have to send, how many phone calls I have to have, how many opportunities I have to have, how many meetings I need to have in order to drive to that $1 million quota. And so really understanding those plans and being able to articulate the details of those plans and also pressure test or have sensitivity analysis on those plans of being able to dial up or dial back the risk versus conservatism, and really getting that down to a science will help you govern more effectively for the year. And I think that those are the areas that are the most difficult for salespeople, including myself. I'm not saying that I can do this well either. It's like one of those things that it's a constant learning battle. But those are the type of things that from our former old boss, George, who, I would see those are the struggles that a good sales leader always is trying to figure out.
Absolutely. But before shifting gears on topic, Chetan, I'd be remiss not to get your perspective on being a data-driven leader. This is something that we've spoken about offline, and I know you're very, very bullish on in a very fascinating way. I'd love for you to just talk a bit more about what it takes to really become a data-driven leader in everything that you do, and why you feel that is so important as sales leaders continue to evolve their careers.
Yeah, if we took a step back, we just look at the macro world that we live in today. Just selling a seat license today as a software seller is still apparent, but it's getting less and less so, because what's happening here is as compute power has come down in cost, and it's even cheaper today to start a company, and the level of things you can do now in the cloud are actually pretty complex, and the solutions that developers and people are building are even more complex with like consumption-based models, where it's whether it's per minute or per SMS or per API call. The different sort of ways to go to market are increasing in complexity. I think what has happened here is that the sellers have not kept pace oftentimes with the buyers. The buyers are actually quite sophisticated now in their approach. They understand the tooling and infrastructure oftentimes equally as well as the seller. And so they, with a PLG motion, they may have even used the tool more than the seller has. The seller may have not, if you're selling a developer tool, they've maybe never even used a tool. And so what does that really mean? I think that translates to, really having to be more solution oriented and understanding the actual value that you're bringing. And the only way to do that is through data in today's world. And you really do have to marry, when you're selling, you have to marry the ability to come to you as the buyer and say, look, I'm going to reduce your cost by X%, or I'm going to increase your productivity by Y%. And here's the reasons why I'm going to do that. At a very fundamental level, if you don't really understand those data elements, it's really hard to actually sell to today's buyer. So now we extrapolate that even further. As a leader, what does that mean? To me as the CRO, if I'm asking my sellers to be more sophisticated in their approach to selling, I equally as a leader and a manager need to be as data driven, because I got to create that culture in which that data is really important. So I like to make sure that I when I coach CEOs or CROs, is that we are marrying both the qualitative and the quantitative data elements at all times. So if we talk about a segment, we talk about what's the goal of the segment, what's the quota of the segment, what's the attainment of the segment, where do we need to go, what's the gap? Like, these are data elements that we need to just instill in ourselves and always repeat it to ourselves to make sure that we're driving. But we also need to not forget about what are the comments that we're hearing that are less qualitative or less quantitative and more quantitative in their approach, because I think the two of those things actually make us better sales leaders or better distribution leaders, because there are things that you just can't see in the numbers. And so I try to focus in on looking at the trend lines. I try to focus in on understanding the cohort data and looking for patterns. And then I usually will go back and say, if I see a pattern, I'll go back and try my best to now validate that with what I'm hearing in the street by the sellers. Are you hearing the same thing? I see this in the usage number. I see this in the renewal number. I see this in the churn number. But is this really true? And you want to get those anecdotes to help support those trend lines. Without that, it's really difficult as a leader in today's market, because, like I said, the buyers are just really quite advanced relative to where they were 10 or 15 years ago. They're just much more sophisticated. So you need to take much more of a data-driven approach when selling and managing teams at scale.
Yeah, that was very comprehensive, and I think a great segue into really looking to unpack a bit more about the way that you structure your own week and your own day. Actually, Chetan, I'd love to get a perspective on both when you were an operator and a sales leader, what a typical week or day in the life looked like for you, and how that's now evolved being a partner at a VC. Just talk to us a bit about what your week used to look like and how things have evolved for you.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I had a executive coach while I was at Twilio, and one of the things that they taught me that I still follow to this day is an acronym called STAB, and it stands for Strategic Time Allocation Budget. And just as you would go through and allocate a budget monetarily with money, you've got to do that with your time. So I follow this process whereby my week, whether I was an operator or whether I'm today as an investor, I will actually block out time for certain subjects or certain ongoing activities. So when I was an operator, I was always recruiting and trying to find new salespeople. It was a constant battle. So I would always allocate Tuesday mornings from 8 a.m. till noon to leave for interviews. And if I didn't have an interview during that time, I would fill it with other things. But I would only fill it with other things 48 hours in advance. So on Sunday, if I knew that there was no meetings, I would either myself or tell my admin, like, you can use that block of time for something else. And I would do the same thing for writing and digesting data. So I would allocate, right after our forecast calls that you and I participated oftentimes, I would allocate Friday afternoon from 2:30 to 4:30 to sit down and run through the forecast and all of the pipeline and all of the data from that last week. What changed from last week? And I would create these blocks of time in which that they were kind of like my sacred time zones. They were strategic time that I wanted to use in order to make myself better as a leader. And I do that today in my venture firm. Like, as an investor, it's very academic in some places where I have to do a lot of deep research, primary research of understanding a particular area. And so you have to spend a lot of time reading and writing about that area. And so I will today, block off 2-3 hours, maybe sometimes longer, sometimes a whole day of that's the only thing I'm going to do that day. What I think we have today in today's market, in today's working world, is a little bit of the Instagram feeling where you're watching these 3-second videos of something and then you move on. And that sort of ADD mentality, which I fall into, make it very difficult to get that sort of really comprehensive understanding of something. Getting to the level of detail that we've been talking about in this interview It's really understanding those details. You need to spend time doing that. That unfortunately doesn't come in 30-second Instagram sound bites. You have to really unpack things in order to get there. And so that's how I kind of think about my week. And I've organized it differently over the years, but I follow that framework of staff.
I love the framework. The premise of the value of time cannot be overstated, right? It's of incredible value. There's a really interesting article written by Mike Spicer, who leads Sutter Hill Ventures, another very successful VC fund. I believe he titled it something like the time value of time. And he just talks about the diminishing returns of time over the years, because ultimately, as you get older, typically people have slightly less energy and vigor and some of the other things that don't necessarily come over an extended period of time. And so it's very, very important to maximize every hour, be acutely aware of the value of every single second, and really maximize that early and often. And to your point, knowing that actually you had a coach working with you on these types of things really demonstrates the level of depth and detail you can go into to make sure that you're optimizing your day and your week. So certainly something that people should look into, and also check out that article that I mentioned. On the premise of time, Chetan, have you seen any particular time saps that certainly for sales leaders you've seen that they have in a typical week, which you just caution them to be mindful of or to avoid, to really get better control of their calendar?
Yeah, I think, there are probably a couple of time sucks. One is we don't see this as much because of COVID now, where people were coming in. I always fell prey to this. I was on the sales floor, and salespeople are gregarious, they're funny, they're enjoyable to be around. Oftentimes it felt like even like a little bit of a club, with the same type of people around. And so I would end up, realizing that I just spent the last 2-3 hours bullshitting with other AEs, talking to my SE about nonsense and having fun and having a good time, and not doing the work that I needed to do, which was, you know what, you got to send the emails, you got to pound the phones, you got to really do the things that you needed to do, instead of talking about around the water cooler about whatever last night's game, which oftentimes can be difficult. The other thing that I found that is very much a time suck is really spending not enough time doing your homework, qualifying deals out quickly. So, you go into a call and you qualify it, and you're like, there's something there, and then you hold on to it. And the next thing you know, you've got 10 of these deals that you're kind of, something there, I'm not sure. And you've got, 1 is fine, but 10 is not. And 10 is now, it's occupying space in your mind, those 10 deals, and you're not really focusing on the 1 or 2 deals that we need to focus in on within a given quarter. And so I oftentimes see salespeople, and sometimes, again, myself, allowing deals to persist within the pipeline much longer than they should, because they don't want to really show that they don't have pipeline. And so they kind of keep that around, and it just, again, occupies space, and we should probably just qualify it out and move it out of the pipeline.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that emotional burden piece is often there's not enough time spent on actually how emotively sometimes that's a huge drain on sellers and sales leaders. They spend so much time actually being concerned and obsessed with trying to keep some of these deals alive, and actually it cannibalizes an incredible amount of time when you just add up the mind space, the walking around the office, asking questions, asking for advice, toying with it in your mind, when all of that same effort and energy and time could be better invested, to your point, actually doing revenue generating activities that move the needle. So definitely one for us all to be more acutely aware of. How do you stay healthy and energized throughout the working week, Chetan? You've been doing this for a long time, long extensive run at Twilio. You're still working at a high pace from what I can tell. How do you keep yourself going and energized just on a personal front?
Well, I'm a very early riser for me personally. So I get up around 4:40 in the morning every morning, and then I go work out at 5 a.m. typically. Not every day, but I do work out several times a week. And so that kind of helps keep things going. The days that I'm not working, I usually use that time between 5 a.m. and 6:30 to do my thinking. I'm a better thinker in the morning than I am in the evening. So that's the time that I'm trying to strategize. I'm trying to think of something new. I'm trying to write something out. I'm trying to break it down a problem. And I usually do that because the kids are sleeping and I don't have to worry about them until about 7 o'clock in the morning. So those are probably the ways that I really think about staying energized. I also like to play sport. So I play ice hockey still, and I play golf. And so between working out and golfing, that kind of keeps my energy levels up. And then, mentally, it's really about spending and finding that quiet time or that quiet place. And for me, like I said, it's between 5 a.m. and 6:30 in the morning, and using that time to think. Sometimes thinking is meditative, and you're just kind of staring at a wall and trying to do it in your head. Oftentimes it's, breaking down a problem in writing, or it's, reading something that's tangential to what you're trying to think about to help you think about it more clearly. That time is oftentimes seen as a burden. And for me, it really just energizes me because I feel like I'm well thought out and I have a little bit more of an opinion. And I feel like, back to our central theme here of sweating the details, it gives me that ability to kind of think about some of those details that maybe I didn't get a chance to think about when, there were 50 million things going on during the day.
I think I'm yet to come across someone who's reached some level of great success that doesn't have an early start to their day. I mean, 4:45 is no joke, Chetan. So kudos to you. I thought I started early, typically about 5:30, but you take the biscuit on that one. But it's great to hear more about your routine, right? And it sounds like everything that you do has really been optimized and educated in some way. Every micro decision is there for a reason. And I think that's one of the broader takeaways from this conversation. We certainly know it's the sweating the details and really being thoughtful about every micro decision to optimize yourself to be able to perform and sustain yourself over time. As we move into the last few questions here, Chetan, I want to talk a bit more about just the premise of winning business and whether there's been any core principles for you, for sales leaders or sellers alike, that you found have been staple when it comes to winning business, whether it's methodologies, talk tracks, ways of interacting with customers, any core principles that really stand out for you?
There are many sales methodologies that I think that they're all pretty applicable, whether it's spin selling, where you're breaking down the situation, problem, implication, need, payoff, or whether you're using MEDIC or MEDPIC. These are sales processes or fundamentals that I think really do help quite a bit in trying to drive a process that will eventually result in a sale and give you a higher probability of success by doing that. If there are more than that, I think, at the end of the day, for me, it's less about the process that you follow or playbook that you have, and more really about just the tenacity of the seller, and making sure that they follow whatever process they feel or playbook that they feel in winning business, but they just follow it religiously and they are consistent. Because I think that the way to win business is to be consistent, both in our responses to questions, the way that we address a customer, an email, all the way to the voicemails that you leave, to the presentations, and being consistent with the way that we think about opportunities, and not sandbag one way or the other, but provide that level of consistency and saying, yep, this is $1 million deal, and I can guarantee that I've qualified it correctly, and therefore we're going to forecast it that way, all the way down to, like you said, sending an email and making sure that we sign off that email correctly, almost always the same way, or we provide the technical support the exact same way, because that's when you start to see the repetitiveness of sales actually creates better execution, in my opinion.
Love it. Love it. You mentioned $1 million deal and, over your tenured career, I'd love to know if there's either a deal or an investment, even a conversation that you've had with someone where there's something that stands out about that particular interaction and some form of key takeaway. Just talk to us about some form of lesson learned or key takeaway that you think is worth sharing with a wider audience.
I think it is, again, back to our central theme of sweating the details. There's been a couple instances of deals in which that I have learned the hard way, in which that I didn't really understand the economic model and the contract well enough, in which that I ended up putting the company in a difficult position. So without naming names of companies or specific deals, I think my biggest takeaway here is in order to be really great at your job, you need to understand the details. And when those details translate to contract value, you learn very quickly that, the clause, around how you're going to collect money and the credits they're going to get and the SLA credits and all of this stuff, when you look at it in totality, the deal may not be as great of a deal as you think. And I think sometimes in today's world, salespeople forget about that sort of broader view, and including myself, I've made the mistake a few times where I didn't quite understand that contractual clause about how are they going to get out of the contract. Understanding and defining indemnification is one thing, and that's oftentimes you can leave lawyers for some of these concepts. But how you interact together and what a customer's rights are within the contract versus your rights. The more complex the deal, the bigger the deal. When they're in the tens of millions of dollars, it gets very complex. And so my big learning here is you got to sweat the details. You got to really get inside those fundamentals and unpack it and really understand it. Because more times than not, I probably should have been a little bit closer to the brass tacks of what's happening versus allowing someone else to figure it out for me.
I think the title for this episode's become pretty clear. It's certainly something related to sweating the details. I have one last question for you, Chetan, which is really to understand from you what's the single best piece of advice that you would give to any sales leader that's listening right now to help them to up level in their career.
I think the best advice that I ever received, and I still follow to this day, is just be persistent, honest, and humble. You just have to follow those three principles. Like you cannot be dishonest in your approach and how you approach a problem. With dishonest with yourself, but also with your team members or your managers. Like you just have to be transparent and honest at all times. And if you marry that with persistence and never giving up, that usually leads to a great outcome. And if you are humble in your approach in those two areas, it leads to great outcomes. And so I've tried to consistently look at my career, and there are times in which that I have felt that I could have been more humble or I didn't give it my all. And those were always the ones I reflect back on and said, man, the outcome wasn't that great. It would have been much better if I had just been, honest with myself that I didn't put in the work and I wasn't persistent enough, or I didn't make that extra phone call, or I didn't spend enough time on that presentation, or, hey, look, at the end of the day, the buck stops with me and I let it slide. Like sometimes it's just, human mistakes happen. And so when you're persistent, honest, and humble, and you try to emote those qualities at all times, I think usually it leads to great outcomes.
Don't leave anything on the table, right? Put it all out there on the field. Love it. Great way to wrap. Have you enjoyed being on?
Oh, I've loved it. Thanks, Alex, for having me on.
Awesome. It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. To anyone out there listening, I hope that you've enjoyed this week's episode. Please be sure to take a moment to share it with a colleague, share it with a friend, engage with it, and make sure you can help increase the reach of the On Target podcast. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one.